My guest on the Crested Butte is Home podcast this week is Ben Pritchett, who was the director of the Crested Butte Avalanche Center last winter, and this upcoming winter he will be the local forecaster for the Colorado Avalanche Information Center for the Crested Butte and Sawatch Range zones. And I am excited for winter. It's getting to be about that time, especially since we didn't have much of one last year. And hopefully we are going to get some snow in the next week or so. So hopefully it is a better winter. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to the Crested Butte is Home podcast on either Apple Podcasts or on Android. And if you enjoy the show, do me a favor and let some of your friends know about it. There should be a sharing feature on the podcast player of your choice. Anyway, let's get on with the show and hear what Ben Pritchett has to say about snow. Today on Crested Butte is Home, my guest is Ben Pritchett. And Ben, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and where you're from?
Where am I from? That's a long answer. Born in Minneapolis, moved to Chicago, Houston, Dallas, Durham, North Carolina, Denver, Boulder, and then I've been here since '96.
Wow, was it what were your parents doing for work? They must have had a.
Yeah, they just kept chasing degrees.
Oh, okay.
They were full-time students, basically. And,
okay.
My dad's got two masters and a PhD, and my mom's a physician who went to school for Spanish, so she had to go back and take biology classes, and then go to medical school, then residency, then fellowship.
Yeah.
So I just chased my parents from school to school. And grew up moving a lot, and then when I moved to the Gunnison Valley, I threw down roots and decided I was done.
Done moving around. Yeah. How did you end up here then?
I went to college a bit early. I went to University of Colorado at Boulder in the civil engineering program when I was 17, and went there and spent a couple years in Boulder. 1 year as a civil engineering student. The next year, I kind of split my time. I was starting to wonder what I wanted to do with myself. I was young and confused. And
right.
I was working for the Sierra Club trying to keep roads and bridges and dams from being built, and I was in civil engineering school learning how to build them. And so I spent a semester studying computer science and realized that the peer group there wasn't really the people that I wanted to work with.
Okay.
Folks were really good at talking to computers, but maybe not so great at communicating with humans.
Yeah.
And so then I checked out philosophy, and I kind of felt like, well, maybe these folks are all full of it.
Okay.
And I just, at 19, I dropped out of school. I moved to the Gunnison Valley. I packed up everything I had in my car, and I initially went to Steamboat. And within a few hours realized my belt buckle wasn't big enough. So I moved on to Crested Butte and set down roots here and have never left.
Had you been to Crested Butte? Did you know what you were getting into, or?
I'd been to Crested Butte previously as a high school student, and so I had been here, loved it. I kind of had my eyes on Steamboat, Crested Butte, or Telluride, and Crested Butte just felt right as soon as I got here.
Ended up winning the day.
Yeah.
Well, I didn't know that you were. I was also a civil engineering student at CU, so we may have even had the same classes together, and I also lasted about a year before I had to switch. So what do you do for fun around here in Crested Butte? What are your passions?
Oh, biking and skiing for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, mountain biking is definitely my favorite summertime activity, and these days I'm getting to ride with my kids, Marin and Tucker. So that's incredible. We're now at the point of, going for family bike rides, and that's amazing.
How long can they go?
They're out for, few hours is usually
Nice.
their limit.
Nice. No, that's good though. That's really good. Huh. So, and did you do that before you moved to the Gunnison Valley? You were like with all that moving around. You were into outdoor sports, or?
Yeah, absolutely. I finished high school in Denver, and in Denver, I went through a program in high school where I learned to mountain bike and learned to take care of mountain bikes as part of my PE credit, and so that was kind of my first introduction. I grew up a skateboarder in Texas, and then moved to North Carolina where we lived on a dirt road, and I kind of had to give up my skateboard.
Oh.
And so I had a few years there where I was playing lacrosse and soccer and really didn't have a sort of a motion sport or an action sport in my life. And when we moved to Colorado, mountain biking quickly filled that void. So I started out in the early 90s mountain biking in the foothills of Denver, and then carried that through to when I lived up in Boulder, and then by the time I moved to Crested Butte, I was all in.
Full blown. Wow, so early 90s, there was a program at your high school about mountain biking? I mean, that was pretty early.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it was great.
What high school was this?
It was at Cherry Creek in Denver.
So super big high school. I guess that makes sense that they'd have more.
Yeah, we had 3,200 kids in the school, so
yeah,
there was lots of opportunity to find your niche, and for me that was mountain biking.
Right. And how about skiing then? When did you start that?
I as a kid I always traveled to ski, so we skied once or twice a year, growing up. So I was one of those kids in blue jeans and rear entry boots, and ultimately ended up in high school getting a ski pass.
Yeah,
skiing every weekend at wherever I had a pass in the Front Range. And then moved here in '96 and worked for the CBMR rental shop and skied 120 days that year, and
of course
never looked back.
Nice. So that's where you probably did a lot of your learning, actually, was just that 1 year.
Yeah, that was definitely where I went from being a okay skier to getting lots and lots of time on skis.
Yeah. Well, we're going to talk a lot about your career in the avalanche field. So talk about your progression then from being a skier working at CBMR Rentals to what you do now.
Yeah, I started out, backcountry skiing in high school. We would go up to Loveland Pass and do car shuttles. And that was kind of my first introduction to skiing in the backcountry. When I was in college, living in Boulder, I had a ski pass up at Vail, and was actually caught inbounds in an avalanche on Prima Ridge.
Oh, really?
I jumped off a cornice. The cornice broke, triggered an avalanche underneath. I got caught, carried, and buried, partially buried. My head and torso were all buried. I lost a pole. It was a real eye-opening event for me. I thought I'd done something wrong. The run was open, but I was scared, and so I actually ended up leaving the ski area that day. I never reported it. I was like, "Oh God, get me out of here!"
So you just wiggled yourself out, or your buddies dug you out?
Yeah, I kicked and kicked and kicked, and basically I lawn darted. I wound up, lawn darted into the snow, and I kicked and kicked and kicked, and kind of did a backflip out of the hole that I was buried in, and left my missing pole, gathered up my skis, went and found my buddy who was down at the lift, and then we just left for the day. I was like, let's get out of here before I get caught.
Right.
So at that point, that was my first introduction to avalanches. And then when I moved here, I went back to school to study wildlife biology down at Western. And while I was in the biology program down there, 3 friends, Casey and Matt and Andy, died in an avalanche on Cumberland Pass.
Okay, yeah.
And I was actually supposed to be with them that day. I had made plans to be with them that day, and then at the last minute, Monday morning we had an organic chemistry test, and I felt like I really wasn't prepared for it. So I bailed out on the day of backcountry skiing and stayed home in Gunnison to study, and Monday morning showed up for the exam at 8 or 9 in the morning, and Casey and Matt were both in my class, and they weren't in class for the exam that day. At that point, I didn't understand why.
Right.
But that event, having two close friends die. Andy wasn't as close of a friend as Casey and Matt, but that was a real watershed moment for me, where I coulda, shoulda been with the group that day.
Sure.
So that really turned me on to feeling like, wow, I've been caught myself. I've lost friends. I'm actively going out there and backcountry skiing, and honestly, I don't know too much about it.
Had you taken an Avi 1 or anything?
No,
Okay.
I hadn't. All my experience to that point had been just with friends and mentors.
Sure.
And so I decided to formally get into some avalanche courses. So that winter I jumped right in and took some courses, and then I forget how old I was, maybe 21 or 22, when the Crested Butte Avalanche Center first started. So Alan Bernholtz started the Avalanche Center. And, myself and J.W. Smith were living in Alan's basement, and we were essentially the first two forecasters with the Avalanche Center in addition to Alan. And we really didn't know too much about what we were doing. We were basically repeating on the local radio the CAIC forecast for the most part.
Okay.
And then over the next 2 or 3 years, we started really forming our own opinions about the stability and actually generating some unique content. So I started out forecasting at a very young age. Looking back, I had no idea the amount of responsibility that I was taking on, and I don't think today something like that could really happen again. It was kind of a unique situation, but that really kick-started my whole avalanche career, getting started with the CBAC, and at the same time I was ski guiding and went through the AMGA certification process to become a ski guide.
And was that with Alan? Was that with Alan then at that point, or?
Well, I was working at Crested Butte Mountain Guides, but I was with the American Mountain Guide Association.
Sure.
Yeah. So
okay.
Went through that certification program, and so I've been involved with forecasting and ski guiding ever since.
Wow. Okay. So how long did you stay with CBAC then?
So I worked at the CBAC up until 2005, and then that spring, Knox Williams at the Colorado Avalanche Info Center had invited Alan and I to more or less become part of the CAIC. And so Alan and I had differences of opinion on whether the CBAC should or shouldn't be involved.
Okay.
So we parted ways at that point, and I joined the CAIC as the education coordinator.
Okay.
And I stayed there through 2012. And during that time, in about 2002, I also started working with AIRI. And so and just some people might not know what that is. Yeah, the American Institute for Avalanche Research and Education.
Okay.
So it's a nonprofit that develops curriculum and instructor training for 110 avalanche schools around the country. And so I was the program director there for 15 years, and I managed a team of folks who then trained the trainers or trained the avalanche instructors. And my team developed the level 1 and level 2 and level 3 avalanche course curriculum, and we delivered the level 3 programs. The level 1s and 2s are taught by the 110 recreational avalanche schools around the country.
Sure.
So I spent a bunch of time there, and in 2012 I was working for AIRI and working for the CAIC, and at that point had a couple kids, and a wife, and just life was too busy, and I needed to give up something.
Yeah.
So I left the CAIC at that point, and then focused solely on area and ski guiding up until 2016, when I came back and rejoined the Crested Butte Avalanche Center. So
Gotcha.
I spent last winter, 2017-18, as a forecaster for the Crested Butte Avalanche Center. Spent a season there, and now coming into this winter, 18-19, I'll be the Gunnison and Sawatch forecaster for the Colorado Avalanche Info Center.
Yeah.
So coming back home to the team that I was with through the 06 through 2012. So looking forward to that this winter.
Yeah. But during that time, if I caught you right, so you were actually the education director.
Mm-hmm.
So it sounds like you went from forecasting to more of education. Is there any reason for that, or is that just kind of how things worked out?
Well, actually, the reason was because the CBAC existed, and so the Colorado Avalanche Info Center wasn't in a position to spend money here in Gunnison County on a forecaster.
Yeah.
So they wanted me a part of the team, but the role that was open was the education coordinator role. It didn't make sense at that point in time to fund a forecaster in the Gunnison Valley in addition to having the CBAC around.
Yeah.
So it was really just a matter of circumstance. They said, well, would you join our team and be kind of a roving observer and manage the education program? And I said, sure, that sounds awesome.
Who were you observing then? The forecasters or classes?
No, as a snow observer. So just as I traveled around doing education, I was submitting observations to the forecast team.
Gotcha.
So I'd help out on avalanche accidents and investigations, and then provide information to support the forecast team. So now coming back here in 18, I will be the Gunnison Zone forecaster. So for the first time, we'll actually have an in-valley forecaster with the CAIC.
Gotcha. All right. Let's take a quick break. In the Crested Butte Real Estate Minute, I recently completed my monthly market update, and you can find that at CrestedButteRealEstateAgent.com under the tab The Market. And what I found is that year-to-date in 2018 here at the beginning of October is quite similar to 2017, at least in the number of transactions. Dollar volume is down a little bit because we have a lot of land sales this year. And if you'd like to be on my mailing list, you can go to that same website, CrestedButteRealEstateAgent.com, and sign up there so you can get my monthly market updates. And I'd love it if you did. And if you have any questions at all about real estate in Crested Butte and Gunnison, please give me a shout. My name is Frank Consella, and I'd love to talk to you. So let's get back to the show, though. All right, so getting back, so this will be the first year that there's a Gunnison Valley-based forecaster for the Colorado Avalanche Information Center.
You got it.
Wow. All right, so I didn't know. I guess I didn't realize. So all the other forecasts that they've done have just been based on kind of observations of CB, because there's always been a Gunnison section of the CAIC. So how have they come up with those forecasts?
Well, the state has 10 forecast zones around the state. So the CBAC was started in the early 2000s. I think we started in 2001 and then became incorporated as a nonprofit in 2002, if I got that right. At that point, the CAIC only had 3 forecasts in the state. So there was the northern mountains, the central mountains, and the southern mountains. Okay. And so during that time, Crested Butte was falling in the same forecast zone as, say, for example, Vail and Summit County, which were the central mountains. That
was central too. And Buena Vista and Salida and Aspen. Okay.
You got it. And Aspen. And so Crested Butte was really not the focal point for that central mountain forecast, and so the CBAC need was really big because we really did not have any locally tuned forecast. Yeah. In 2006, the CAIC changed their approach from having 3 forecasts to having 10 zones around the state.
Okay.
So ever since then, there's been a Gunnison zone forecast, and that forecast, up until about 4 years ago, that forecast was generated in Boulder. Mm-hmm. About 4 years ago, there was a new position formed where the Gunnison and the Sawatch ranges were forecasted together with one position out of Leadville.
Okay.
And so the position that I'm in now is one that has been in place for a few years, but it's been staffed out of Leadville, not out of Crested Butte.
So the Sawatch range versus the Elk range.
Right. So now I'll be forecasting remotely, driving over and visiting the Sawatch range a couple days a week.
Uh-huh.
And then forecasting from within our community here.
Gotcha. Well, I guess you kind of mentioned it, but why did the CBAC need to form? What's unique about the Crested Butte snowpack? What makes it different than Vail? Or
yeah, well, it was formed very specifically because we are geographically distinct from many of the other parts
Sure.
of the Central Mountains, and the big anomaly is the amount of snow that falls in the Paradise Divide area.
Sure.
So in the CAIC's zones, the southern part of the Aspen zone and the northern part of the Gunnison zone lie right along that Gunnison-Pitkin County border, where Schofield Pass registers vastly more snow than other parts of the central part of the state.
Sure. As does Kebler in the Irwin area, of course, too.
Exactly. Yeah, that whole little
Marble.
Yeah, Marble. It's the West Elks. That whole corridor through there is a very deep snow zone.
Yeah.
That is not well represented when you're, lumping it in with, say, the Collegiate Peaks or Fremont Pass or other
Right.
areas in the Sawatch. So the CBAC was formed because we really didn't have any local data, nor did we really have much in the way of local representation in that forecast. And so it was a truly watershed moment because it created an opportunity for our community to really start to engage in the forecasting process.
Mm-hmm.
At that point in time, in the early 2000s, we, at the CBAC, we had kind of a crazy step where we actually encouraged the public to provide information to each other.
Uh-huh.
And that was the idea of having publicly shared observations was kind of a unique concept at that stage.
The CAIC wasn't asking for public comments
Well,
at that time?
information was going into the into the CAIC, but there wasn't a publicly available information sharing network. And so the CBAC actually was allowing members of the public to post observations to each other.
On the internet, I assume.
On the internet,
okay.
Yep. And that was a pretty unique thing. And it was not without its failings. The first couple years we did it, we really struggled because the public hadn't yet been trained in what kind of information would be valuable.
Sure.
And there was a little bit of chest pounding and like, hey, I went and skied this line, and it was getting used in a way that wasn't necessarily for public safety, and that's all part of the experimentation process. So CBAC was really cool in that it was an experimental venue for a new technique used in avalanche forecasting. And today, it really has become the norm where all around the country, avalanche centers have publicly shared information. So that was, I think, probably the CBAC's greatest influence on the avalanche forecasting was the development of public observation sharing.
Yeah.
It was a pretty cool step, and it happened right here in our valley. And today, you wouldn't really imagine an avalanche center not having shared public information.
Right. Well, it's so important. I mean, that as you would know much better than I mean, it's all about data points, and for one or two forecasters to dig a handful of pits in a day, that's only so much information, and probably just in one valley versus getting all these reports out of all kinds of different places. And granted, there's different levels of schooling and what people are going to report, but even hey, we didn't see anything is valuable, especially if it's someplace no one's going, right?
You got it. Yeah, it really changed the way that our community here in the Gunnison Valley engaged with avalanche forecasting in general. Suddenly people went from considering giving information as a negative thing that might reveal powder stashes to a critical component of shared public safety information.
Yeah.
So, here we are 15 years after the fact, and now we have a very engaged community. So we're really lucky as backcountry skiers living here to have so many people, so many eyes, all sharing quality information on a daily basis.
Yeah, I think a few years ago, if I'm not mistaken, we had the Crested Butte area had several times more observations than the Aspen Zone, even though our population is much smaller, if I'm not mistaken. So it sounds like it's a thing here that we do.
Absolutely. We have a really engaged community, and I don't know those numbers off the top of my head in terms of comparing total numbers of observations, but without question, given the few number of people that we do have in our community, we have, on a per capita basis, it has to be one of the most engaged communities in the state in backcountry skiing.
Yeah. Well, let's go back to the Crested Butte Avalanche Center then. And last year you were the director. So what was that like, running the show, especially in terms of some of your other job responsibilities other than just the forecasting part of it?
Yeah, it's, as a nonprofit director, there's a lot going on. So you're trying to make sure the ins and outs of money are happening responsibly and in a way that sustains the organization over the long haul. So preseason was a great deal of effort talking with potential sponsors and securing money to fund operations for the season, and at the same time preparing for the operations of generating avalanche forecasts. The really big winter a couple of years ago caused a great deal of damage to the Dan K weather station up at Elkton. The infrastructure had been torn apart by the really big snow load, and so last fall, spent a huge amount of time getting that thing up and working again. So as a director, it's kind of a two-pronged approach. One is making sure the nonprofit works. The other is making sure the forecasting operations work. Yeah.
Did you like the director side of it, or were you like, man, I wish I could just go out and dig some pits and call in the reports?
I have to say, avalanche forecasting is why I do it. And so that's one of the things I'm really excited about working with the CAIC is I'll be working as an avalanche forecaster full time. I don't have to split my focus between fundraising and nonprofit management in addition to avalanche forecasting.
What so when you're going out, I mean, you're the only forecaster for the zone, right? So are you just getting backcountry partners that are friends of yours to go out with you, or are you a lot of solo, or how do you manage that?
So generally working with a partner is much preferred. So not to say there aren't times where some field work can be accomplished by myself, but generally try and go out with backcountry partners and go out with a specific objective for the day to investigate a certain question. What component of the overall forecast picture is least certain? Where do we need information? Is it the distribution of a weak layer? Is it the sensitivity of a slab and weak layer combination? Is it watching the development of a new avalanche problem and watching another avalanche problem go away? So every day we identify what information do we need to increase the accuracy of the forecast, and then we go out and target a location that's going to help inform that missing information.
When you're out, do you are you digging one big pit and spending quite a bit of time in it, or are you usually trying to dig several faster pits, or is it a combination of both, depending on what you're looking for?
Absolutely, a combination. Profiles are a very useful tool, particularly when you're looking at persistent weak layers and persistent slab problems. But if we're investigating a storm slab problem, profiles are really not the tool that we use to investigate that circumstance. So profiles are a part of the picture, but by no means a majority of the work that we do. So tracking distribution, tracking sensitivity, those may require a profile, but generally speaking, looking at avalanche occurrences is the most valuable data that we can get. And then looking at structure across the landscape, getting lots of looks quickly is generally much more valuable than spending a whole lot of time in one place, because we're dealing with a medium that's, nearly infinitely variable across the landscape. And so spending too much time in one place means omitting time looking at the distribution of that same structure. What
do you think the future of avalanche forecasting will be? Do you think there's some new tools that you'll be able to use? I mean, there was obviously, the iProbe or whatever you want to call it, that was trying to find things. And then, I'm just picturing what if you could send out 20 drones to fly around and take pictures of the avalanches that have occurred, things like that. Do you see any of this coming down the road?
Absolutely, yeah. The Colorado Avalanche Info Center is on the bleeding edge of technology use in avalanche forecasting, and there's going to be a lot of great resources coming along. The database that the CAIC maintains, it's been intact since the early 2000s. That database has changed through time, but it really is a repository of information that we're now starting to tap into in a different way than what's been done in the past, where GIS is really getting integrated and issues of scale are getting resolved, where you can look at avalanche patterns across big regions and correlate that information against weather stations in those same areas and start to see connections between, say certain amounts of snowfall, whether that's happening in a 24-hour time scale or whether you're actually looking at hourly precip gauges and seeing rates of precipitation and then connecting that to the patterns in avalanche activity.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of technology that's going to be coming in the next 5 to 10 years that's going to change a lot of how we do avalanche forecasting.
Almost like someone's going to be writing an algorithm of what weather stations are seeing and trying to predict avalanches to an extent, perhaps.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, the first stage is looking for correlations. And so, it's not that right away we're going to have any sort of predictive tools, but right now we're trying to figure out what data is available and how can correlations be drawn between historic measures that were, certain parameters that were exceeded, immediately before a significant avalanche cycle.
Yeah.
And, there's a lot of variability out there. Each season you get a completely different narrative, a different storyline of how the layers evolve and build. So it's not as simple as A plus B equals C.
Right.
But you do start to see common trends where you exceed a certain rate of precipitation in a certain amount of time, and avalanches start coming down the mountainsides. And so building in real-time measurements of precipitation rate is one example of a tool that's being investigated right now.
Yeah. Well, let's change the subject a little bit. You do a lot of forecasting. How much guiding do you still do in the winter? Or is that kind of taking a back seat?
Well, it has taken a back seat. I still guide maybe 5 to 10, as much as 20 days a year. It kind of depends on the season, but I've got a clientele that I've been working with for a long time, and so I do still do some ski guiding occasionally.
Yeah. Do you prefer one or the other? Is it just good to mix it up? Or
no, I love mixing it up for sure. Yeah, it's wonderful. I love being able to go out with folks that I have long-standing relationships with and help them have incredible experiences in the mountains. And it's a wonderful wonderful way to enhance people's lives and in a different way than providing avalanche advisories.
Sure. Well, let's you and and to an extent, Janae, your wife, you run Colorado Backcountry. So here's your opportunity to tell us what you do in the summer with that company.
Yeah, so Colorado Backcountry, we started it in 2006. It's a small local guide service, and in the summer we do a lot of mountain biking trips, so guided mountain biking. We also do a lot of mountain bike instruction. We have a component of our business that's called the Backcountry Bike Academy, and we've got a team of coaches that work with us, and we offer mountain bike skills training.
Okay.
We have a curriculum that we can break out in lots of different ways. Sometimes we do 2 or 3 day intensive courses. Other times we'll do a little 2-hour clinic. Sometimes we'll do a month-long series of evening clinics. And so we've had a huge amount of success with the Backcountry Bike Academy in the last 2 summers. That's a really fast-growing component of our business. We also do a lot of hiking and wildflower tours in the summer. We use the elk trails out in the mountains and create really fun, adventurous routes up peaks where we get away from the crowds and climb mountains and see incredible sights and learn about ecology. And so summers are super busy. We've kind of opened the Pandora's box of taking on employees. Up until 3 years ago, it was just Janae and I, and now we've got a team of around 10 folks working with us.
Oh, nice.
It's been wonderful. We're so lucky to have such great employees and passionate people who are highly skilled and motivated, and so summers are booming here in Crested Butte for everybody.
Right.
It's no different for our business.
Nice. We'll start to wrap it up a little bit. So Crested Butte is home for you. So why do you continue to choose Crested Butte as home?
Oh, it's the community for sure. It's such a wonderful place to be as a family. We have such an incredible lifestyle here. My kids are in school here at the Crested Butte Community School. They've got a 90-second commute from our house to school.
Right.
They've got a ton of friends, and they can get themselves straight over to after-school activities. And my kids have spent an order of magnitude more time on bikes than in vehicles.
Right.
And that's for us a really important quality of life issue.
Sure.
My kids have grown up with skis and bikes as just sort of the tools of life. And that's a really big part of it, and the number of friends and community assets that we have living in a small town. It's just never been anywhere that has such a great blend of people, community, recreational amenities, wonderful climate. It's just hard to beat.
Right. Yeah, for sure. Where can people learn more about you and some of these organizations that you work for?
Well, the Colorado Avalanche Info Center is my moving forward this winter. It'll be my primary gig for half the year. And so avalanche.state.co.us is a great way to get a hold of avalanche information. You can go to avalanche.org and find avalanche information for anywhere in the United States straight from avalanche.org. Click on the map at the location you want to go to. So for avalanche forecasting, that's the best place to go, avalanche.org.
Okay.
My company in the summers, Colorado Backcountry, it's easy to find. Mr. Google knows how to get us.
They've got you figured out.
Yeah.
Okay. And all right, that sounds good. Anything I should have asked that I'd neglected to?
I don't think so.
Okay, we covered it. That's good. Well, one last question then. Who else should I interview?
Oh, I think you should get in touch with Ian Hatchett. He's one of the most exciting and interesting people in our community. And,
for sure.
He's a wise fella. He's probably taught me more about life in general than anybody else. So, strongly recommend connecting with the good old Aussie.
Yeah, I think he's been on my list actually, and I'm interviewing another Aussie tomorrow, so I might have to break up the Aussiness a little bit. But no, he'd be great. I mean, he was a big climber, right? He's got some first ascents on some really big peaks in the Himalaya and everything. So yeah, that'd be great. Well, thanks so much, and hopefully we have a good winter, huh?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Frank.
Thanks.